Oi, what's going on, everybody? When you see Smooth Jimmy right there on the screen with his cigar and his lock of the week, you know what that means. It means it's time for another Balls Deep breakdown with me, your host, Uncle Weezy. Today, we will be looking at the Marlon Vera versus Davey Grant rematch. This fight already happened before, about 5.5 years ago. And Davey Grant won a unanimous decision, 30-26, 30-26, and I believe 29-27. Vera lost a point for grabbing inside the gloves. So we're going to have a rematch some years down the road. So let's go through all the stats. After we do, let's see if we can find a lean one way or the other after looking at the lines. And we can find some opportunities to make some money on this fight. That's what I'm looking to do. So I'm looking to help you guys also do the same. So let's start, like we always do, with the tail of the tape. Marlon Vera, the younger fighter. So this fight happened almost 6 years ago. Marlon Vera was probably 22 or 23 at the time. Davey Grant in his prime at about 29, 30. Both of these guys are 5'8". We got a 70-inch reach for Vera. We got a 69-inch reach for Davey Grant. And Marlon Vera is a switch stance fighter, while Davey Grant fighting out of the orthodox stance. Davey Grant trains at SBG Manchester, while we got Team Oyama for Marlon Vera. He's been with Team Oyama for quite a while now. Fighting out of Ecuador is Vera. Fighting out of England is Davey Grant. So yeah, this is going to be the rematch. We've got them at two different points in their career, though. This time, at the time they first fought, it was Marlon Vera's third fight in the UFC. He had been coming off the Ultimate Fighter Latin America show, and this guy had his first professional fight. If we go down here to the professional experience, we see that Marlon Vera's career is almost 11 years long. So, as we can see, he's 28 years old. This guy started fighting very young. So, even though Davey Grant got the best of the first matchup, we have to realize that now, instead of Davey Grant being in his prime and Marlon Vera just starting off his career, now we've got Marlon Vera in his prime, and we've got Davey Grant as a 35-year-old bantamweight. That's kind of when the bantamweights start getting a little bit over the hill. So it's going to be really interesting. This is why we do rematches like this sometimes, is because this is a different story. They're at different points in their career this time. That first fight was almost 6 years ago, and even though Davey Grant was dominant in that performance, we can see why Marlon Vera is a favorite now, because the tail of the tape is telling a different story, especially when it comes to age, as to where these people are in their careers. So let's look at the pro experience. Marlon Vera, 24 pro fights to Davey Grant's 17. We got a 16-7-1 draw record for Marlon Vera, while 13-4 for Davey Grant. We got 240 minutes of cage time for Marlon Vera, 101 for Davey Grant. We got an average fight time of 10 minutes for Marlon Vera, an average fight time in 17 professional fights of 5.94 minutes per Davey Grant. This guy's getting it done inside the distance, or he's getting finished inside the distance. Very interesting. And both of these guys have long careers, but like I said, they started at different points in their lives. As Davey Grant here, with about 12 years of pro experience, had his first pro fight probably at the age of 23, while for Marlon Vera it was at the age of 17 or 18 that he had his first professional fights. If we look at the UFC fights here, we can see that there is a huge experience advantage for Marlon Vera, despite the fact that their mixed martial arts careers are about the same length. We can see that, in the 11, or let's say the 12 years that Davey Grant has been fighting, he's only got 17 fights, while in the 11 years that Marlon Vera has been fighting, he's got 24 pro fights. So we know that Marlon Vera has been the busier fighter over his career, and especially in the UFC, when we see that they've been in the UFC about the same amount of time as well, we see twice as many fights, more than twice as many fights for Marlon Vera, with 16 to Davey Grant 7. 10-6 record for Vera, 4-3 record for Davey Grant, and we got almost more than 100 minutes more of UFC cage time on the side of Marlon Vera here. The average fight time just a little bit below 11 minutes for both of them. We look at the finish stats. Overall, we'll start with Marlon Vera, 50% of his overall wins by sub, 38% of his overall wins by KO for an 88% overall finish rate in his 16 wins. We got Davey Grant with a 62% win rate by sub overall and a 23% knockout rate overall. We add those together, we get an 85% finish rate. So both of these guys just a little bit south of 90% finishers in their careers. And that's for 13 wins for Davey Grant and 16 wins for Marlon Vera. So both of these guys definitely finish. And even more impressive is that in the UFC, in his 10 wins, Marlon Vera has finished 9 of them. 40% by sub, 50% by KO. And I've got a cheeky little statistic for you on the finish stats here that we'll go to shortly. But also Davey Grant, 50% of his UFC wins, 4 of them, 4 wins came by KO, so 2 wins by KO and none by submission for Davey Grant. If we look at how these guys get finished, we see that Davey Grant, overall in his 4 losses, has lost all of them by submission. So he has never lost a fight by decision. Very interesting. And in his 3 UFC losses, he was subbed in all 3. And Marlon Vera, in his 24 professional fights, has never been finished. So this guy is stupid tough. And he has fought some serious power punchers. He's fought some serious fighters. But yeah, this guy is a stud. He is impossible to finish. He is incredibly tough. He was born to do this. So yeah, Marlon Vera definitely very, very tough. And we will go to the striking and grappling statistics next, but I want to show you something here in the advanced stats about Marlon Vera that I thought was interesting. So here are all of Marlon Vera's fights. He started with Marco Beltran, and we go up the ladder here, and we see his entire career. And we look at the wins, the winning. So in all of his wins, I have the record of the opponent that he faced in this column, and then in all of his losses, if he lost the fight, here's the record of the opponent of the losses. And if we look at the only fight that my guy Marlon Vera won by decision, so out of his 10 UFC wins, 9 of them are by finish. The only one that came by decision came at 145 pounds. So he's actually at 135 pounds, he's 9 for 9 on his finishing as a finisher. And just another thing too, one of his 5 losses, or one of his 6 losses, came at 145 pounds to Song Yadong. It was a COVID fight, so they probably both came up a weight class. But yeah, and that was a very close fight. I thought Marlon Vera won that fight. But let's go back to the matchup template here. Just a quick plug though. If you do like these advanced stats, they're available on DFS by the Numbers Patreon for only $10 a month. You get these advanced stats. You get his model with all of his stats. You get the targets for DraftKings, the projections, lineup percentages, rankings, and I do a DraftKings and a FanDuel tab, which elaborates how many points per minute they score in the cage, what percentage of their work rates come from striking, what percentage of their work rates come from grappling, the work rate total in the fight, the points per fight total, which is the fighter and their opponents. You can see who's in the higher scoring fights. All this stuff is available in DFS by the Numbers Patreon for only $10 a month. But the matchup template that you see here, which we're going through for this video, the link to this will be in the description of this video. Download it for free. Help it to use make your gambling decisions. But let's go to the striking statistics here. Marlon Vera landing 3.64 significant strikes per minute out of 7.42 attempted for a 49% striking accuracy in his 16 UFC fights, while Davey Grant is landing 3.93 per minute, offering 8.26 per minute for a 47.55% striking accuracy. I got the power numbers here. This is the knockdowns per total significant strikes landed in the UFC. So we see that Marlon Vera has a 0.79% knockdown per total significant strikes landed. So he's probably got 5 total UFC knockdowns in his 629 significant strikes landed. And we see that Davey Grant, very similar knockdown per significant strike landed ratio here of 0.71%. The knockdowns per 15 minutes, almost identical. Both of these guys have definitely got some power on the feet. In Davey Grant's last 2 wins against Jonathan Martinez and Martin Day, he landed a left hook in both of those fights. It was just absolutely thunderous. He put Martin Day out cold, and he knocked Jonathan Martinez the fuck out as well. So Davey Grant in his last 2 wins has shown some serious power in those hands. If we look at the defensive numbers here, 3.95 absorbed from Marlon Vera out of 8.23 attempted. So his opponents are landing more significant strikes than Marlon Vera lands, and they're also offering more significant strikes than Marlon Vera is. So 52% striking defense for Vera. While if we look at Davey Grant here, we see that he is absorbing way less than he lands. At 3.93 he lands, and he only absorbs 2.47, and his opponents are offering less significant strikes than Davey Grant. So Davey Grant not only is landing more, he's also offering more than his opponents. He's been the busier fighter in the cage, while Marlon Vera is getting outlanded on the feet, and also his opponents have been more busy than him. So a little interesting stat there hidden within the striking statistics. We see the striking defense at 52% for Marlon Vera, not very good, while it's 63% for Davey Grant, which is very solid. But here's where the big difference is on the defensive side, and that's how chinny these guys are. Marlon Vera has been in 16 UFC fights, 16 of them. He's never been knocked down. His opponents have landed 682 significant strikes against him. Let me repeat, he has never been knocked down, and he has never been knocked out. This guy is extraordinarily tough. While Davey Grant, on the other hand, has been knocked down on 1.69% of the significant strikes landed against him in the UFC. For a bantamweight, that's something that I would consider to be very chinny. Probably the top 5 to 10% of the bantamweight division in terms of how much he's getting knocked down. 0.63 times per 15 minutes. For somebody with 7 UFC fights, that is a pretty high knockdown per total significant strikes landed. So I'm seeing definitely, even though both of these guys are showing a lot of power, if you're talking about which one of these guys is more likely to get knocked down, you gotta go with Davey Grant. I mean, if they both land the same huge punch, Davey Grant will get knocked down before Marlon Vera will. So that's a big statistic right there. If we go to the grappling stats, we see that in their takedowns, and let's get this just a little bit back here. I want to note not only how many fights they have, but how many takedown attempts in those fights. So Marlon Vera has 16 UFC fights, and he's attempted 24 takedowns, so that's 1.5 takedown attempts per fight, and he lands 9 of those 24 for a 37.5% takedown percentage. While Davey Grant in his 7 fights has landed 11 takedowns out of 24 attempts. So Davey Grant is actually attempting about 3.5 takedowns per fight, and he's getting about 1.5 takedowns per fight, and he's getting them at a 45% clip, 2.3 per 15 minutes. So if you had to choose which one of these guys is more likely to attempt to get the fight to the ground and which is more likely to actually get it to the ground, it would look like it's Davey Grant on both accounts. Marlon Vera has been more active with submission attempts at 1.13 per 15 minutes, while Davey Grant's only 0.21. And we look at the control time, Marlon Vera controlling his opponents 13.15% of the time, while Davey Grant is controlling his opponents 26.36% of the time. So if we look at the defensive numbers here, we see that Marlon Vera, he's been taken down 12 times in 16 UFC fights in 41 attempts against, showing a 70.73% takedown defense. Pretty solid. Anything above 70% is pretty good usually. While we see Davey Grant's opponents in 7 fights have attempted 18 takedowns and have gotten 6 of them at a 66.67% takedown defense. Hang on just a sec, folks. My dog absolutely hates the UPS truck, and he barks every time the UPS truck comes by, so I apologize for that. But here we go. On the defensive numbers, we see that Marlon Vera is getting taken down 1.04 times per 15 minutes, and for Davey Grant, it's 1.25 times per 15 minutes that he's getting taken down. Davey Grant is getting almost one submission attempt per 15 minutes attempted against him, while nobody's even tried to submit Marlon Vera in 16 UFC fights. And we see that Marlon Vera is getting controlled about twice as much as he's controlling his opponents. His opponents are controlling him at about 27%. Marlon Vera is controlling his opponents at 13.15%. While we see that Davey Grant is out-controlling his opponents at a 26 to 17% clip. So what does that tell us? It tells me that if we're looking for a path to victory for Davey Grant, we see that he attempts more takedowns per fight. He gets more takedowns per fight. And as a matter of fact, in their first fight, Davey Grant was taking down Marlon Vera and controlling him on the mat for extended periods of time. They were both covered with blood by the end of the second round, so all of the submission attempts that Marlon Vera was throwing up were in vain. There was no way he was going to catch him in anything. They were both covered with blood and entirely slippery. So I see a path to victory here for Davey Grant, potentially by decision, because you're not finishing Marlon Vera unless you bring a shovel with you into the cage, and they don't allow that in the UFC yet. So Davey Grant's best path is by decision, and if he's going to get that decision win, you're going to want to attack Marlon Vera by taking him down and trying to control him. Marlon Vera, 13.15% control time for, 27% control time against. And in the first fight, Davey Grant got this win by out-controlling his opponent, taking him down, holding him down. And if he's smart, he'll try to do the same thing. And he can box with Marlon Vera, there's no question about that. He's shown some great striking recently in the UFC, has Davey Grant. So, but if he doesn't like how it's going on the feet, he could try to take the fight to the ground and do what he did to him last time. So this is the grappling statistics. While Marlon Vera is a credentialed submission artist, and while Davey Grant has all of his losses in the UFC have come by submission, so it's not fair to just call, say Davey Grant has an advantage on the ground, because he doesn't necessarily have that. Marlon Vera has a path to victory to win by submission. However, Davey Grant could also win the fight if he stays out of those submissions by taking down Marlon Vera, by winning 2 out of the 3 rounds, and by squeaking by with a decision, because I think Davey Grant already knows that he can't finish this guy. He's probably not going to knock him out. I mean, he's probably not going to submit him, because Marlon Vera's had all these fights in the UFC, and if John Lineker couldn't knock him out, if Douglas Silva de Andrade couldn't knock him out, if Jose Aldo couldn't knock him out, if Sean O'Malley couldn't knock him out, I don't think Davey Grant can, and I think Davey Grant understands that. So maybe, Davey Grant might try to go to his grappling here, might try to find that path to victory by taking him down, holding him down, and winning by decision. So let's look at the strength of schedule here, get an idea for the kind of opponents these guys have faced, and see what we can find in these numbers. So the ratio overall, so these are all of the UFC fights. The ratio is the win-to-loss ratio of the opponents of Marlon Vera here and Davey Grant here. So we see that Marlon Vera's opponents have a 1.35 win-to-loss ratio, while Davey Grant's opponents have a 1 win-to-loss ratio. Davey Grant, the average Davey Grant opponent has 5.14 UFC fights, while the average Marlon Vera opponent has 6.75 fights with an average record of 3.88 wins and 2.88 losses. And then we see that Davey Grant has an average win-loss record 2.57, 2.57 for that perfect 1 ratio. So Marlon Vera is fighting the better competition ratio-wise and the more experienced competition. As far as the wins go, very similar with a 1.12 and a 1.17 ratio. Davey Grant's opponents have slightly more experience on the win side than Marlon Vera. And for their losses, we see that Marlon Vera is losing to the better competition here with a 1.65 win-loss ratio, while Davey Grant is actually losing to competition in the UFC that has more losses on average than wins, which means that there's some variance in Davey Grant's performance. Maybe he's winning some fights he shouldn't be winning, and he's losing some fights he shouldn't be losing, therefore making him kind of difficult to bet on. So that's what we're seeing there. So I see an advantage for Marlon Vera in the strength of schedule. If we look at the last 5 here, we see for Davey Grant, wins three-fight win streak over Jonathan Martinez, Martin Day, Gregory Popov, and then 2 losses by submission to Manny Bermudez and Damian Stasiak, while Marlon Vera had a unanimous decision loss to Jose Aldo. He hurt Sean O'Malley's leg early in the fight and got that TKO win there. A unanimous decision loss to Song Yadong. That was a very close fight. A win by KO over Andre Ewell in the 3rd round, and a 2nd round submission win over Nocolene Hernandez. So they're both 3-2 in their last 5 here. Let's look at the advanced stats once again. Get a really good look at their total opponents and what we see here in the strength of schedule. So if we take a look at Marlon Vera's 6 losses, for example, we see Jose Aldo here, 11-6 record. Song Yadong at 145 pounds, 5-1 record. Douglas Silva de Andrade, 4-3 record. Lineker, 12-4 record. And then the Davey Grant fight back in 2016, 4-3 record for Davey Grant, and then Marco Beltran in his UFC debut, who had a 3-3 record. And we see the wins over Roman Salazar here, 0-2. Ning, 2-2, which was his only decision win, and that came at 145. Brad Pickett, that was his retirement fight, 5-9 in the UFC. He subbed Kelleher with an armbar, 6-5. Waliji Buren, 0-3. Kennedy, 2-4. Saenz, 5-5. Nohelin Hernandez, 0-2. Andre Ewell, 4-3, and then the TKO win over Sean O'Malley at 5-1. So, yeah, he's beating mid-range to lower level UFC competition here. So with the exception of the Sean O'Malley win and the Ewell win, which is a solid win, nothing really jumping out there. Kelleher's a solid win, I suppose. But yeah, that's what we're looking at for the overall schedule of Marlon Vera. While if we go to Grant here, we see we've got wins, the last 3 wins. Jonathan Martinez, Martin Day, 0-5 in the UFC. Gregory Popov, 0-2 in the UFC. And then Marlon Vera back in 2016 at 10-6 record. Losses to Chris Holdsworth by sub. Damian Stasiak, 2-4 by sub. And Manny Bermudez, 3-2 by sub. So let's look at the odds here and see if we can find anything that we like to see. The money line on this fight is Davey Grant is plus 180 at the moment, and Marlon Vera minus 235. We see that for method of victory, we see Vera by decision is 100 plus 165. Davey Grant by points plus 380. That was actually at plus 420 last night. So there is definitely some money coming in on that Davey Grant decision line. I wish I kind of got in on it last night. Because that's the only way that he wins, and it'll be a great hedge if you are betting Vera to hedge Grant by points, because you're almost getting 4-1, and that's the only way he wins this fight. As far as will the fight go the distance, we see that they are saying it's more likely to go the distance than not. Minus 102, the fight doesn't go to decision line. If you like Davey Grant inside the distance, it's plus 490. Marlon Vera inside the distance is plus 175. So there's going to be a number of different ways that we can play this fight, I think. But if we'll just go back here, what I'm looking at here is that Marlon Vera's definitely got an advantage being the younger fighter, being the more experienced fighter, being the busier fighter, being the more diverse finisher. He's definitely got a path to victory to win by submission, as all of Davey Grant's pro losses have come by submission. Where I see Vera having another advantage when it comes to the striking is in the power, because they both have similar power numbers, but Davey Grant is much chinnier. So I see also a path to victory for Marlon Vera by knockout. As far as grappling goes, I see that Davey Grant will probably be the guy that's more likely to bring the fight to the ground, and he can keep it there. So I think Davey Grant's probably got an advantage of maybe being the round winner in being able to strike with Vera, maybe take him down, hold him down for a little while. If he can stay out of the submission, that could be a potential path to victory for him. But I also see Vera having a pretty big advantage in the strength of schedule, having been the busier fighter, having fought the better competition, having lost to the better competition. And so, I do see a lot of advantages here for Marlon Vera. I do like the inside the distance line because all of Grant's losses have come inside the distance, and 90% of Marlon Vera's wins have come inside the distance. Davey Grant is getting old. He's 35. That wouldn't be old if he was a heavyweight, but he is a bantamweight, so that, that's another red flag there. I see almost all the advantages here going to Brandon Vera. Not Brandon Vera, Marlon Vera. However, if you want to be safe, you can always hedge that Grant by decision line at 4-1 almost, and maybe just cover your exposure to the fight so that if Grant does eke it out, maybe you just lose a half unit or a quarter unit or no units, and you can limit your upside with that strategy as well. But at least you won't get killed, and the only way that you really would get killed is if Davey Grant is the first person to finish Marlon Vera in his 25th professional fight. So the pick is Marlon Vera. I'm picking him inside the distance as well, but I do like that Davey Grant by decision bet as a way to hedge that exposure. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please leave a like. If you have any suggestions of other fights this week you want me to break down, leave it in the comments. Thank you so much for watching Balls Deep Breakdowns with your host Uncle Weezy, and the next one that will be coming up will be Erosa Choi. I'm going to start the tape study on that right now and hopefully get that out to you in about 3 hours. Thank you so much for watching. God bless, and I'll check you next time.